Can the Eagles afford a luxury draft pick in the 2023 NFL Draft? I'll get into that and more on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Wednesday edition of the show. You can find us Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Excited for this edition of the show. Got some interesting topics that I want to dive into, and starting with the idea of the Philadelphia Eagles making a quote-unquote luxury pick in the first round. So what does a luxury pick look like? I think, to me, it's at a position that maybe the Eagles don't necessarily need, both for the short term and the long term. It might not be at a position that I think is as important as others, but it could really help just like add to a strength already that you have on your team. It's another player that can just take you to another level and make you even more unstoppable at certain spots. That's going to help you for the current Super Bowl run of 2023. So a luxury pick to me for the Philadelphia Eagles is not who's going to be your long-term right tackle after Lane Johnson. It's not going to be who's your CB1 once Darius Slay is gone, once James Bradbury is gone. It's not going to be who is the long-term right guard. The list goes on. Who's going to be your starting safety outside of Terrell Edmonds? Is it Reed Blankenship is going to be one of your draft picks? To me, a luxury pick is going to be like a running back or a tight end or a wide receiver. It's positions that maybe aren't as important. Maybe the Eagles already have pieces to the puzzle already on the roster, but you add another guy and it's like, okay, they were really good at these spots. They were really good on the offensive side of the football. They've got a ton of weapons, an elite offensive line, an elite quarterback. They've got some pieces at running back. But if you add this guy, it makes them all that more unstoppable. And so I think they could consider it. I don't think it's very likely, but considering the state of the Eagles right now, their long-term look when it comes to draft picks, it's something that you might have to prepare for. And it is something that they've done in past drafts. You look at 2018, they traded down with the Baltimore Ravens with that 32nd overall pick so Baltimore could come up and take Lamar Jackson. What did the Eagles do with that second-round pick? They took Dallas Goedert. Was Dallas Goedert a need pick? Do they need a long-term tight end? Not necessarily. Is Goddard the long-term tight end now? For sure. But they did have a 28-year-old Zach Ertz coming off an MVP season. We knew that 3 years later, he still had two really good elite years as a tight end one. Had another year where, again, he didn't look like he really dropped off. And then with the Arizona Cardinals these past two seasons, he's still been one of the better tight ends, a top-tier tight end in football. Zach Ertz, to me, is still a top tight end in the league. And that's 2 years after he left with the Eagles. So did the Eagles necessarily need to replace Zach Ertz with Dallas Goedert? No. But they said, hey, for Carson Wentz, we have this elite quarterback. We just won the Super Bowl. We've got Alshon Jeffrey. We've got Nelson Aguilar. We've got Jay Ajayi. We have Zach Ertz. We have an elite offensive line. We already have an offense that just beat the New England Patriots in a shootout with the greatest quarterback ever throwing for 500-plus passing yards. And we just beat that team. But if we add Dallas Goedert, now we've got a 12 personnel package where we have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. We're going to be all that more unstoppable. I wonder if the Eagles would consider that kind of move in 2023, where it's, is this going to be the best thing for us in the long term? No, but it's a premier talent at a position that could really take us to the top and help us with this immediate Super Bowl run, in 2023 to help us this time take out the Kansas City Chiefs or the Buffalo Bills or, the Jacksonville Jaguars, Los Angeles Chargers, whoever's going to make it in the AFC. Like, let's add even more firepower for Jalen Hurts' disposal. So in this instance, when you look at this draft class, who would be the luxury picks for the Eagles, let's say at 10, or I'm thinking more that 30th overall selection, or maybe the second round pick, something similar to what you did in 2018. I think some of the names that pop up, there's two specifically. One's a running back, obviously, Texas running back Bijan Robinson, who we just saw the report today that on Twitter, several NFL scouts have said that Bijan Robinson is a quote unquote gold jacket type of player, where this could be a generational running back prospect. A couple other guys to think of when it comes to like a luxury pick. How about Georgia's tight end, Darnell Washington? Very similar to what you did with Dallas Goedert. You don't want to replace Goddard. He just had an incredible season. Look at the performance in the Super Bowl. He's a top 3 tight end in the league. To me, the best, outside of Travis Kelce, of course, the best run after the catch tight end in the league. When you combine run after the catch and blocking ability, I think the combo of that, he is better than Kelce in that way when he has both. He's only 28 years old, like Ertz was. He has that contract extension in place. But this is what you did with Zach Ertz too. And now you have a 12 personnel package with Darnell Washington and Dallas Goedert to go on top of your 11 personnel with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Quez Watkins. You've got Rashad Penny in the backfield and Kenneth Gainwell. You have an elite offensive line in Jalen Hurts. Darnell Washington as your second tight end. Compared to last year, you didn't have a second tight end that could be a legitimate passing threat. You had Jack Stahl and Grant Calcaterra. Like, those just are not options that are, what you had with Ertz and Goddard from 2018 to 2020. So Darnell Washington could take you over the top and make you all of that more dangerous in the passing game, where you're already the most balanced offense, I think, in football. Last year, they had, to me, the number one rushing attack. Whenever they wanted to be the best rushing team in football, the Eagles were. And they also had a top 5 passing offense with Jalen's pocket numbers, that elite pass protection, those weapons. And of course, you have target monsters in Goddard, Smith, and Brown. So I don't know. They probably won't do this. Take a first round pick on a 4th passing option, even wide receiver. That would be a luxury pick. Like if you took, I don't know, Jordan Addison falls to 30, or Jackson Smith and Jigba, or Zay Flowers. I saw a mock draft, I think it was from Pro Football Focus today, that had the Eagles at 30 taking Zay Flowers. I would predict that they do not do these moves. I don't want to take a running back early. Dallas Goedert's not going anywhere anytime soon. Like I said, you have those 3 target monsters. Brown and Smith are long-term pieces. One's paid. You're going to pay Smith. So, taking a Zay Flowers wouldn't make much sense. But, man, they would be loaded for the short term. You get 5 years, 4 to 5 years of cheap play with that 5th-year option if he's a first-round pick. And they do have a lot of picks next year to potentially address needs for the long term. So, maybe, I'm not saying, again, I would predict that it doesn't happen. I prefer to go with other positions, then running back, then receiver, then tight end. I'd much rather go with an edge rusher, a defensive tackle, an offensive lineman, a tackle guard tweener, rather have a safety, rather have a corner. But I wouldn't say there's a 0% chance because, again, it's cheap, it's cost effective for 4 to 5 years. It helps you maybe more for the 2023 run than any other position. And you have a lot of picks next year, again, to address needs. This year, you only have right now, 5 picks lined up? They're going to have more eventually when it's all said and done. They're going to collect more through a trade down or, some way. Howie will find a way. But, they could maybe afford to go with one of these luxury picks at running back, tight end, receiver. I would not say there's a 0% chance that it happens where they could take a Bijan Robinson at 30. I don't think at 10 they're going to do it for sure. They could take a Darnell Washington. They could take a Zay Flowers and really put this offense to the next level. I think the luxury picks, again, they come on offense because on offense right now, they don't really have any glaring needs. Even at right guard, I don't think is an immediate need because you have Jack Driscoll and you have Cam Jurgens. You have pieces there right now that Jeff Stoutland can get ready for 2023. And every other position you have is either locked up with a star for the short term and or the long term. So the luxury picks are on offense because if you had a tight end, it's just another weapon behind Dallas Goedert. If you had a receiver, it's just another weapon behind, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and potentially Quez Watkins. You add a running back. Yeah, would Bijan Robinson be the guy over Rashad Penny? and Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott and Trey Sermon, absolutely. But do you need a running back right now? No. You have 5 guys that I think all put together can be very effective with Jalen Hurts and this elite run protection, this run blocking. So it's something that I could see them doing if nobody wants to trade up with them, if, the board doesn't fall their way when it comes to line play, and they're very much thinking about this Super Bowl run in 2023. 2018, it happened with Dallas Goedert. Did he eventually become a staple core piece that's now the face of the tight end position for Philadelphia? Absolutely. But at the time, it was a luxury pick. And it, to me, still was, because they didn't have to replace Zach Ertz. They did eventually, and they actually upgraded. But it was definitely a luxury pick to put the offense over the top and try to run it back in 2018 after winning the title in 2017. So it's a fun exercise. It's a fun idea to consider. I don't think it would happen. I wouldn't do it myself, but I wouldn't lie. If they took one of those guys, even Robinson, I'd be excited. I don't think it's going to happen because, again, you're not paying Robinson that second contract. So to me, it's not worth that pick. But he is an elite running back talent that a lot of scouts now are saying is generational. So all of these guys would be a lot of fun to pull up the YouTube highlights for sure. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, what's Howie Roseman going to do in the first round when it comes to prospects at specific colleges? Is he going to dive back into the premier Power 5 schools? Is he going to go for some, more underrated prospects at smaller schools? All that and more coming up on this edition of Locked On Eagles on a Wednesday evening, and it's brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. The NBA playoffs are almost here. I cannot wait. I'm so in on the Los Angeles Lakers and this turnaround they have right now with LeBron James back. Anthony Davis is on a tear. The Los Angeles Clippers as well. I love me some Russell Westbrook. Big game tonight between those two teams. The Philadelphia 76ers, Joel Embiid, probably going to win MVP. What a big win against the Boston Celtics last night. It's a perfect time to download the FanDuel Sportsbook app, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA, and now the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Eagles fans, we are continuing on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. We talked about the Eagles potentially considering a luxury pick in the first round. And by luxury pick, I mean a running back with Bijan Robinson, who imagine, again, I don't want a running back in the first round. I don't think they'll pay him. I don't want to take a first round prospect that you can guarantee he's not getting a second contract. But man, Robinson's talent behind that offensive line and Jalen Hurts, it would make you're already the most complete offense in the league, in my opinion. It would make you all that more dangerous. Adding a tight end like Darnell Washington, a receiver like a Zay Flowers, it's something that I don't think is likely. The Eagles like to go with the trenches in the first round. I think they're more likely to take a corner than those spots, even a safety. But at the same time, don't rule it out. They have the flexibility with draft picks next year, with a lot of their holes already being filled for the short term and long term on this roster right now. So they could afford it. If any team could afford, even over the Kansas City Chiefs, if any team could afford a luxury pick this year, I think it would be the Birds. I want to continue on with some draft talk, and I want to talk about colleges and Howie Roseman. And it's interesting because you heard Howie talk on Jason Kelsey's podcast, New Heights, which was an awesome conversation that I finally got around to yesterday. He was kind of talking about how he's had success since he came back in 2016 as the general manager, and he said this in a few interviews now with NFL Network. He said the same thing where, you want to zig when the rest of the NFL is zagging. You want to do things different to stay ahead of the curve. And that's how you contend for championships consistently. Like if you're trying to catch up to what another team's doing, you're already behind. And so I totally get that. And that's part of what I love about Howie Roseman. And even when he strikes out in 2020, he mentioned like, hey, I'm still going to go for it. I'm still going to try new things. And try to, again, stay ahead of the curve so I can get this team to consistently be in a position where they can win Super Bowls and compete every single season. And again, I think that's totally true. Like, the first time he won a championship in 2017, what did he do? He went for a market inefficiency. It was trades. Most teams were not trading a lot of draft picks to add talent in immediate starters. So what does he do? He trades a 3rd-round pick for Ronald Darby, trades a 4th-round pick for Timmy Jernigan, trades a 4th-round pick for Jay Ajayi. The next year, he trades for Michael Bennett. Even the creativity of trading up twice up the board to go get Carson Wentz, trades for, Deshaun Jackson. And, he really, to me, in my opinion, he started the trade era before the Rams did it. The Rams really didn't start trading until 2018 and 2019. Howie started doing this in 2016 and 2017. Now, these past 2 years, he's still been aggressive, but he sees, okay, now the league is a very trade-heavy NFL. What am I going to do? I'm going to collect a lot of draft picks. I'm going to build through the draft, but also because I'm collecting these draft picks, I'm now going to have more assets to be aggressive myself. So what I love about Howie is he never feels like he has it figured out. He's always saying, okay, this is how it works now, but how is it going to work in a year or two? He tries to stay ahead of the curve. He's not set in his ways where I did it 5 years ago this way, or like, Bill Belichick saying, I did it 20 years ago this way, and it's going to work now the same way. No, that's not Howie. But I will say part of the turnaround he's had since 2020 actually is not zigging when everybody else is zagging. It's zagging when everybody else is zagging in the form of how he evaluates prospects now in the draft. Because I think sometimes, again, I would rather have Howie be this creative zigging versus zagging mindset type of guy versus being complacent and not trying new things at all. Again, I love that. And that's part of how the Eagles won a championship. And it's how they got back in 2022. But I think sometimes from 2018 to 2020, where he got caught, at least from a draft perspective, is that philosophy. I thought he was trying too hard to be different. So, for instance, the Jalen Reagor pick over Justin Jefferson. He was trying for a guy at a smaller school that had a niche style. He wanted speed. And Justin Jefferson was seen clearly as a consensus better player, better prospect, but he went with Jalen Reagor. I think you saw him go for, smaller school prospects. And, in 2018 or 2019, I should say, I think most people said you should take DK Metcalf over JJ Arcega-Whiteside, but he takes JJ. I think sometimes he was trying a little bit too hard to be against the grain and be different. Even the Jalen Hurts pick in 2020, obviously it's worked out now, but I think the logic behind that move, trying to be different when you just paid a quarterback $100+ million, I think that was an ill-advised pick at the time if you wanted things to work out, from the point of view of we want Carson Wentz to be our long-term quarterback. Again, it worked out now, but the mindset back then, I think, was ill-advised, and he was trying to be different and be ahead of the curve. Whereas now, why is he killing these draft classes in 2021, in 2022? It's because I feel like he's actually simplified things. He's doing what a lot of other teams that do well in the draft do. I think he just made it simple. He takes star players at top schools at important positions. And I think he also placed less of an emphasis on style just over talent, like Devontae Smith. People had concerns about his style as a skinnier, lighter receiver. Guess what? Howie said he was an elite receiver at Alabama that won the Heisman and was dominant in a national championship game, multiple national championship games. I'm taking the guy. And look at how good Devontae is now. Nakobe Dean, he's an undersized linebacker, dropped to the 3rd round, but guess what? He was a stud. He was the heartbeat of maybe the best defense in college football history, the 2021 Georgia Bulldogs. I'm taking Nakobe Dean. Jordan Davis, yeah, his style, he's like a nose tackle type of body, but guess what? He's athletic. He goes against the grain. He's talented. So I'm going to take him despite his style. I think he was trying a little bit too hard to push this philosophy into his draft process. And again, you don't want to totally get rid of, going for smaller school players, because I think sometimes if you're all in on just taking guys from Alabama or from, Georgia or LSU, Ohio State, then sometimes you're going to miss out on the Jeremy Chins that played at an FCS school. You're going to miss out on the Carson Wentz's that, get you an MVP season to help you win a Super Bowl. You're going to miss out on the Jordan Mailatas, right? You have to get creative. And now in football, in college, prospects are coming out of everywhere. Like there isn't, a avenue in the draft that there's just nothing coming out of there. The FCS, heck, even D2, you're seeing, I mean, look at this year for the FCS, North Dakota State offensive lineman Cody Mock. I mean, I think he's going to be a first round pick. So again, you don't want to totally remove that and say, have this SEC tunnel vision. But I think Howie has done a good job of saying, hey, Landon Dickerson was a star on an offensive line at Alabama that won national championships, coached by Nick Saban. I'm taking Landon Dickerson, right? I think that has really helped him actually keep it simple. And I would like him to kind of keep that theme going this year. Again, I don't want him to take, smaller school prospects off the board at all, but I'm all in on taking Jalen Carter. I'm all in on taking Nolan Smith or Kelly Ringo at 30 or at 62, the Georgia cornerback. Maybe he's a safety. I'm not sure yet. Still haven't decided myself, but a really good talent. And like basically saying, hey, I'm going to build my defense in the form of the 2021 Georgia Bulldogs. That was like the best college defense of all time. I'm just going to add as many prospects from that team as possible. I think again, will that strategy always work? No. From like 2010 to 2016, Bama sometimes was churning out some brutal prospects. Courtney Upshaw, Mark Barron, trying to think of as many as I can. D. Milner. The list goes on and on. There was just guys coming out that were shot. Who's the other guy? Reggie Ragland really wasn't all that great. There was a lot of players that were kind of shot, and Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, Oregon, USC, like you're not guaranteed to be a star just because you come out of an elite program. But I think Howie has done a really good job of just saying, hey, these are the best players at the best schools. And I'd rather take a bet on that kind of player panning out in the NFL. And for the majority of the time, these last 2 years, that has absolutely worked out in their favor. Whereas before that, he really never took, before 2021, when was the last time he took an Alabama player early in the draft? When was the last time he took a Georgia player early in the draft or a top school? When you look at since 2016, who are his top picks? First round, Carson Wentz, North Dakota State. 2017, Derek Barnett, Tennessee. Not a small school, but it's not Alabama. It's not Ohio State. And 2017, the second round, Sidney Jones, Washington. 2018, Dallas Goedert, South Dakota State. 2019, Andre Dillard, the Pac-12, Washington, baby. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, the Pac-12, Stanford. Why do you think that whole don't draft Pac-12 players came about? Because of them and Sidney Jones. 2020, Jalen Reagor, you took him from TCU over the LSU star receiver on a national championship team in Justin Jefferson. 2021, you finally fixed it and said, nope, I'm taking Devontae Smith. And so I like that simplified approach. Again, I like that Howie is always creative and zigging while everybody else is zagging. But I do think he needs to give himself more credit for the draft of kind of going back to traditional ways. I think it's actually worked out in his favor. And so this year, if you go with a Jalen Carter, a Nolan Smith, a Kelly Ringo, a Brian Branch, the safety from Alabama, a Jordan Battle, I think that's not a bad strategy to have to build this defense. And your offense is kind of built that way too right now. Jalen Hurts, Alabama and Oklahoma. Lane Johnson, Oklahoma. Landon Dickerson, Alabama. Devontae Smith, Alabama. A.J. Brown, Ole Miss. So I'm cool with building your team that way. And I think, Howie deserves a lot of credit for kind of changing that philosophy. And again, everything's contextualized. You got to evaluate each prospect individually and not get tunnel vision about one trait or where they went to school and all these things, but it is part of the process. And I think Howie putting more emphasis on where they went to school, I think it has helped over the last 2 years for sure. All right, Eagles fans, we are going to wrap up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. Coming up next, my good friend from Bell and the Birdman, another Eagles podcast that I enjoy, John Barchard. He had a great idea today about the quarterback position for the Birds next year. And I want to get into that coming up next. I agree with what John had to say, so I'm going to definitely campaign for this mission he has next year right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. So my good friend John Barchard over at the Bell and the Birdman, had a really good idea today, and it probably stemmed from Marcus Mariota having his press conference with the Philadelphia Eagles, the new QB2 behind Jalen Hurts, the new backup for 2023. The deal has finally been done, 8 years in the making. Still can't believe he's going to be a midnight green. Getting a jersey. It's a cool jersey. It was already a cool Eagles jersey to have. Now that he's actually going to be on the team, I think it's even cooler. Going to get it in midnight green. Definitely going to happen. But John mentioned on his show and then on Twitter today, and I was thinking about this the last few weeks about, because Howie's made these comments about, again, as I mentioned in segment 2, zigging while everybody else is zagging, staying ahead of the curve, and, just staying ahead of the other teams in the NFL to, remain a consistent Super Bowl contender. And of course, he's thinking of it from a perspective of a GM, like what can he do with trades? How can he, evaluate prospects in different ways? But when it comes to like game planning this year, how can the Eagles do something different? And John was pulling up some tape from a 2 QB system in college, basically saying, and I'm all for this, the way the Eagles could be a little bit different this year, and even like, change up from the QB sneak last year. That's how they stayed ahead of the grain, the QB push. Teams never really did that before, where they have 3 guys pushing the quarterback forward on 4th and 1, 4th and 2. As you hear Jason Kelce and Jalen Hurts say all the time, 92% of the time, it works every time. That's how they stayed ahead of the grain last year. How do they stay ahead this year? Maybe it's using Marcus Mariota more in these kind of packages. Maybe it's putting Jalen Hurts and Marcus Mariota in the backfield. I could totally see an RPO with Mariota at running back, and Jalen can decide to pull and throw himself or run, or you give Marcus Mariota the ball, and now suddenly Mariota can run or pass. So like it's almost like a double RPO option play. That's super intriguing, especially in the red zone. Or you could do some counter plays, and you could do some pre-snap motion where Mariota and Jalen Hurts, they're moving around the line of scrimmage. They're 2 of the most mobile quarterbacks in the NFL from the 2022 season. I think it's a good way to try to be creative. And no, this is not 2020, the garbage of putting Jalen Hurts out there with Carson Wentz. That to me was completely different. And, as much as Wentz definitely had mobility and can make plays outside of structure, he didn't have the speed and the lateral quickness of a Mariota, of a Jalen Hurts. This is definitely going to be a lot better than that facade. But I think the Wentz-Hurts formation walked, so the Hurts-Mariota formation can run. And I like John, even he mentioned a video today of like a double quarterback sneak of like, who's going to get the ball? Is it going to be Mariota? Is it going to be Hurts? I think Marcus has a role here. I think this is, and again, it's not worked in the past for the Eagles. You look at not just 2020 with Wentz and Hurts, but back in 2009 when Michael Vick came out of prison and the Eagles signed him. He was the 3rd string behind Donovan McNabb and Kevin Cobb, but Vick had some packages and he came in. There was one time where he should have threw a touchdown, actually. I don't know if you remember this play, but it was Sunday Night Football, and Vick was called in motion by McNabb, and it was like a reverse pass. It was a reverse play. McNabb pitches it to Vick, and then Vick was going to run, but then he pulls up at the last second and throws it to Jason Avant, who dropped the ball in the end zone. I liked that play in the red zone. I think that could work with Mariota and Hurts. So not that it's something you want to do all the time. This offense is so good. You don't want to do too many things like that are gimmicky, but hey, as a way to stay ahead of the curve and short yardage packages in the red zone, just to be creative at times, having Mariota and Jalen Hurts in the backfield. John, I'm with you, my man. I'm all in on this campaign. We've got 2 Eagles podcasts fighting for the 2 QB formation in 2023 with my boy, Marcus Mariota. So definitely something interesting that I think they should consider. And I'll guarantee you they're going to try it at least once next year for sure. Again, this is not going to be Wentz Hurts. There was no creativity to that. You knew that Jalen Hurts was getting the ball the majority of the time. The package where like Wentz is playing receiver and blocking, just ridiculous. If they're going to do this with Hurts and Mariota, I think it's going to be a lot more thought out, a lot more creative and innovative. And it's going to be, I think, in the right spots. It's going to be in the red zone, short yardage situations. And these 2 are athletes that I think could actually feed off each other. So it's a fun thought for sure. And I'm sure they'll work on it in practice and training camp for sure. All right, Eagles fans, that's going to do it for this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thank you so much for tuning in to the show. You can subscribe on YouTube and on any podcast platform for a show Monday through Friday. Make sure you follow us on Twitter as well at Locked On Birds and at DBIASI LOE. Thank you for making Locked On Eagles your first listen every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft, salary cap management, and more. Join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get Locked On Eagles. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go Birds.